Well, good evening, and welcome to the Privy Council. We're looking forward tonight to sharing with you some of our thoughts on things that shape outcomes that we all live with, uh, risk, and the concept of asymmetric risk. And so we're happy to have with us today a very great panel, some of whom you know, and most of whom you know, and some of whom are old friends who are back. Um, and we're going to walk through sort of the concept of asymmetric risk and how you can make that work for you and how you can look at and not get crushed by it at the same time. So I'll introduce folks who probably need no introduction. Ron, you want to say hello to folks and tell them what's going on with you? And
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Just enjoying life here in the Black Hills of South Dakota and hoping for more snow. Thank you.
and for those folks who don't know you, because there will be people here who didn't know you or weren't in the future conflict. Why don't you give us a little bit of background on who you are and what you've done? And
Well, just like Steve Martin, I was born a poor black child to a sharecropper family, and no, I'm kidding. Um, I'm a retired agency CIA paramilitary operations officer. Uh, Multiple tours: Afghanistan, Pakistan, um, Central Asia, all the fun brown places, and actually got to go to some green places too in the southern Philippines, hunting Al Qaeda terrorists and rescuing American hostages. Uh, Great 38-year career, and now I'm in South Dakota relaxing.
well, I'm glad you could join us tonight.
Thank you.
Joe.
Well, greetings, everyone. Glad to be on here. Ron didn't point out that he also spent a brief stint as a Thomas Magnum impersonator. But there's some great photos of Ron out there. Ron's one of our favorites. Glad to have him. For those who don't know me, Marine Corps military police veteran. That's usually when people go, "Oh," and stop listening to me. But
I did that once. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I did some tours in places with lots of sand too. But I actually, my service began when a lot of our enemies spoke Spanish, and did some time in some green places there. And along with some stuff in Africa on both sides, East and West Africa. And after that, I've been in the security business, both as a corporate investigations person for some big companies, and also as a private military contractor providing protection for people. And I still do that on the contractor side, but CONUS, every once in a while an CONUS thing comes up, but mostly here protecting people and protecting places.
Pleasure to have the author of Tactical Wisdom here, and we'll move on now to the author of Mongol Moon.
If I could find where the mute button was. Hi, glad to be here. Glad to be invited by this group to kind of sit in on the inaugural episode of this. My name is Mark Sibley. Most of you probably, if you know me from Twitter. I am the author of Mongol Moon, which is I wouldn't say post-apocalyptic, but apocalyptic World War III novel. It's a cozy fireside read with puppies and clowns, nuclear weapons effects. And during the day, for the last 25 years, I've been a corporate security crisis and risk manager, focused mostly on what things could go bad around facilities that we have, or corporate functions, or the finances, or the reputation of the whatever organization I'm working for. But I don't focus so much on asymmetrical risk. I focus more on global, systemic, and emergent risk. So I will interject here tonight where I can.
Well, we look forward to that, and we're glad to have you. And I'll turn it over to our resident snow bunny chaser somewhere in the wilds of Canada, Colonel.
You weren't supposed to divulge my location, but
well, Canada's a big place. I mean,
yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Mike. I have a background that spans a couple things, but probably the most relevant piece is 30 years in the military. Most of that time was either, well, all of the time was either infantry or in special operations. And I have since retired from everything. My post-military experiences revolved around systems engineering and or program management. But I am fully retired now, and I am at Whistler Mountain on the West Coast, a little north of Vancouver for any of you people that do ski or snowboard. And I've taken up residence in uh, the Warlocks Clubhouse, an Airstream up on the side of a hill with a Starlink connection to the world. So I'm very thankful to be on the show.
Well, we have, and you sort of undersold yourself, Mike. I mean, you also have written a series of books, which you'll have a chance to talk about a little later in the show. But let's not bury the lead, right? I mean,
We'll get there.
okay, all right. And my friend Jim, old Hong Kong, we go
It's
way
good
back.
good to be here. Auspicious times, and surrounded by sage security, risk, and global thinkers, which is a rare luxury.
And us.
It's
Yeah.
a very rare luxury. Yeah. You guys, I've followed you guys as this has developed and participated a little bit, and I'm really honored to be part of the group. My background is international development. Been doing it since I was a child, not necessarily by choice, but by skill. And it's just genetic. So I was kicked out of airplanes on tarmacs before there was security and told to sort something out, and been doing it my whole life. And I kind of miss the days you could walk down the jetway and get on the tarmac and smell the fuel and the heat and different times. So been at it a while. So I've developed a skill somewhat like these gentlemen, but I'm a commercial risk specialist, and I look at difficult markets, and I look at things that go bump in the night that people don't want to talk about because they're too far down the horizon. And I look at things like supply chain, and have been speaking about that for too much time. So we'll see what happens. And I'm looking forward to sharing wisdom to educate people about risk and about opportunity that comes with risk, because without risk, there is no opportunity. So it's my soliloquy.
Watcher, if I can ask you to pull up the slide, the Duke slide, please. I owe people an explanation as to why we're doing what we're doing. So the Privy Council is been convened, created by the Duke of Montana, and I am the High Chamberlain of the Privy Council, and the Duke is established an area of micro sovereignty in northwestern Montana. Not that far from Whistler, but a ways. And so our role is to advise him on emerging threats to the micro sovereignty of the duchy and other things. And so we thought this might make an entertaining show. And actually, he thought it would be a way to recoup some of the costs associated with hiring us to begin with. So he sort of pressed us out. Now, you probably won't see the Duke very often because he's off doing Duke stuff. But it's you never know. He may just show up. He's a little bit like Joe's dog Lucy or my cat, who may just pop in from time to time. So keep your eye out for a Duke sighting. But it may be somewhat like Mark's sequel. It may be always over the horizon for a while. But sooner or later, we'll see the Duke. So our role tonight is to try to educate you a little bit on asymmetrical risk. It's entertain you a little bit, and as we've said about this show, it will make you smarter and better looking. If you don't get one, you may get the other, and we'll see if we're able to deliver on that mission. So I think that's my call to bring up the the first of the promotional opportunities for Colonel Mike Bennett. And if you'll go to that slide and put Mike up there, this
slide is too much.
I thought you would enjoy it. So
You're killing me.
yeah.
Hello again. It's Mike. That is me. That's the Santa Warlock, and you may have seen the tweets going out my timeline thing. I am the author of that series of books on the left side. Those 6 books. And yes, the HVA is the Warzam. That's the Warlock's Zamboni right there in the red box, which I drove across country, and I was privileged to drive through both Montana and South Dakota and see that beautiful piece of the country.
And thankfully we avoided you, but
and they avoided me. You know, they blew me off. Okay. I guess ironically, perhaps, the series of books that you see there presented really deal quite a bit with asymmetric risk, or certainly an asymmetric response to a risk, which the offensive nature is more and more mayhemish as you progress through the series progression, books 1 through 6. So if you enjoy our discussions tonight on the subject of these risks, you might also enjoy reading my lunatic way of dealing with our enemies. That's it. I guess you can. He's got a link on the bottom, or you could go to my web page, author, AUTHOR, author MikeBennett.com, and you can access any of the ways of purchasing those items through the website.
And Mike, is that the current special for the 6-book series? Is that accurate? I
Yes.
think that's right off your website. So
yep,
you may want to tell folks a little bit about that if they want the full dose.
For those that don't know what I do there, all those the books are signed, so you get a nice blue box. Now I've got these pretty blue boxes; they all fit in, and each book is signed, and that Special Forces signature, cigar comes with them. I throw that in there also. And a lot of people like that. They I hear a lot of commentary about the cigars. Let me tell you, what I want is more commentary about the books, and please write a review. That's and you can see Mark shaking his head, because it certainly helps. That's it.
Very good. Watcher, do we have any housekeeping on super chats or anything that we should take up before we move into the main discussion?
Certainly. We've got one super chat that came in before the show. That was $42 on Rumble from a Lamb Chop saying, standing by. Thank you so much, Lamb Chop. We really appreciate you.
Well, we take requests. We'll play just about any tune you want for $42. Thank you very much. I'm not sure where that number's derived, but we appreciate that a great deal. All right. Let's move into our discussion then on asymmetric risk, if we can. And if I ask you to pull up that first slide of what is asymmetric risk. Yeah, I think that's the better view. So asymmetric risk is a situation where you're faced with an opportunity to either embrace risk that has the potential to return, to create a potential return that's a lot greater than the aggregate amount of effort or resources that are committed into it. This is going to sound very wonky, but we'll expand on this, and I think you'll understand it. Or to choose to avoid a risk where the downside is far greater than the investment that's involved as well. So, and asymmetric risk really was sort of a financial term and related to investment risk for many, many years, but it now has begun to be applied to risks of all sorts and all types. But the simple action is the leverage that you get when trying to move a boulder. So the asymmetric risk is to be able to use the leverage created by the prop and the shaft and move the boulder, or just push on it with your hands. So I think that's a concept that everybody can understand as a basic concept in this. And now let's give you a parable of asymmetric risk. And if you look at this slide carefully, you can see that this is a Ron Moeller distant relative on the cover. I mean, that is either that or that's when he was in those brown places, one of the two. I
At
don't know.
worst, that's a second cousin. At worst.
Yes, Ahmed Moeller, right? He's the second cousin. So I'll try to illustrate this with a little story. So in this book, The Richest Man in Babylon, which again was really sort of written as a treatise about asymmetric risk in the construct of investment. The story goes like this. There was a very rich merchant in Babylon who was coming back from a trip outside the city. And he didn't get there before the gates to the city were locked at night. And he was locked outside. And he'd sold everything that he had. He had a lot of gold, and he was a little bit worried about being where he was. So he sat down and built a fire to wait for the gates to the city to open the next morning. And a few minutes later, a herdsman came up with his sheep, also too late to get into the city. And so they started talking, and then and the herdsman lived nearby. And one of his servants came up and said, "Oh my gosh, you have to come back to the house. Your son has been hurt seriously, and you've got to come right now." And he was very worried about that, and he thought, "How do I leave my sheep here?" And he said to the merchant, "I'll sell you all my sheep, and I'll sell you my sheep for an amount of money that is a really, really good bargain, half of what they're worth when the gates open tomorrow. But I need you to make this decision now." And the merchant thought about it, and he said, "I can't really tell how many sheep there are. He tells me there's 200, but I don't really know. And I don't really know, if that's really what the price is going to be." And so the guy waited for a minute. He said, "Oh, well, if you're not going to do it, forget it. I'll just leave my servant here, and I'll go." So the guy thought about it and thought about it, and he just said, "No, I'm not going to take advantage of this risk." And sure enough, the following morning, the gates open. The servant takes the sheep in and sells them for 4 times what this guy had offered to sell them to. And this is where you begin to see with asymmetric risk, there's a certain characteristics or aspects of decisions around asymmetric risk. You rarely have perfect information. And this is something that you'll see played out in the things that we're going to talk about as we go through. And you may have to sacrifice a very valuable resource, which is your time. But patience is often not rewarded in the construct of asymmetric risk. And sometimes you have to risk taking a real risk for a dramatic change of your circumstances. But it doesn't always involve just really hard work. Sometimes it's just the ability and the willingness to make a decision based on imperfect information, but go with your gut or have some sort of vision as to what it is that you're going to do. So in what we talk about here is examples of asymmetric risk, both historically and more importantly, looking into the future. Then you'll see that this plays out over and over and over in terms of the construct of asymmetric risk. Let's go to the next slide, if we could, please. So to summarize this once again and to tie it back, asymmetric risk creates opportunities for disproportionate outcomes. Sometimes it's favorable and sometimes it's unfavorable. And here we've just gathered some examples, which we'll talk a little bit about to try to expand on that. Favorable, we've got everything from David and Goliath, and that's about as asymmetric as it gets in hand-to-hand combat, except it wasn't hand-to-hand because he had a sling. Alexander at Gaugamela, he was vastly outnumbered by the Persians, but found a way to pierce the lines. The Vikings, asymmetric risk. And maybe the world champion of all time for asymmetric risk was just Hernan Cortez, the guy in the lower right-hand corner, the guy who basically committed mutiny, took his ships, went to Mexico, burned them in order to make sure that none of his sailors would go back and turn him in for mutiny, and conquered the Aztec Empire in 2 years with 500 soldiers and 13 horses. So his ability to capture asymmetric risk through willpower is something that is pretty remarkable. And Jeff Bezos, everybody thought Jeff Bezos was crazy, right? Selling books on the internet, and that's pretty clear what that's turned into. And then maybe my favorite example of asymmetric risk, both favorable and unfavorable, are Meghan and Harry, because it was very favorable for one, but it's been massively unfavorable for the other, in the context of one series of decisions that's yielded bipolar outcomes. And I'm going to let these other examples are the Depression, Pearl Harbor, whose anniversary is today, the Kennedy assassination, the Tet Offensive, and Osama bin Laden, but not for why you think, because I think that the aspect of Osama bin Laden is we were unaware of the risk that we were taking when we effectively created Al Qaeda in the first Afghanistan conflict against the Soviets.
It's almost like history's repeating itself in that regard.
Yeah, it is. And Joe, you feel free to go down that trail, please.
Well, so we created the Osama bin Laden creature during the 80s, during the fight against the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. We funded several different groups of tribal fighters, one of which was led by a young Saudi princeling named Osama bin Laden. And that gave rise to this organization known as the Base, or Al Qaeda, that then began to oppose our interests as soon as they had kicked the Russians out. They considered the Russians the greatest evil facing them at that time, and we were the second greatest evil. And all that we did was push the threat down the road, but the threat was there nonetheless. And you can draw some interesting connections between that and other events going on in the world today. Some say that that's what gave rise to ISIS as well. We originally funded several local militias in the far northwest reaches of Iraq, which then became something very, very different. And we actually had some dealings. Ron's chuckling because he knows we had some dealings with a young lad named Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and it got pretty bad from there. So
before that there was al-Zarqawi. I mean, the guy who was spun off from al-Qaeda to create ISIS itself in Iraq. So
yeah,
we tend to spawn these things through our lack of attention to the risk associated with this first or second derivative of risk associated with what we're doing.
Well, and I'll say the unpopular thing, because it's common for me to say the unpopular thing. We're funding what is essentially a militia in the southeastern reaches of the Ukraine, known as the Azov Battalion, and it's become incredibly popular and become this great thing, and it could very well turn around and become a very bad thing for us in the future, giving rise to a little more right-wing fascism, and not even right-wing. I mean, a rebirth of the Nazi greatness of the 40s. I mean, it's kind of their entire MO. And right now they've got everyone fooled and got everyone thinking what a great fighting force they are, fighting those evil Russians. And we're funding that.
Yeah. And so, Mark, you've got several examples of asymmetric risk in Mongol Moon, where guys or gals do an awful lot with a little, because they're able to see the leverage afforded them in terms of how to approach risk. Anything you want to call out there in terms of what comes to mind in terms of asymmetric risk that's highlighted in your book? You're on mute.
Holy cow. It's late. I was up writing at 5 a.m. So, yeah, I didn't know that you were going to ask me the really intelligent questions, even though it's my book and I wrote it. I don't remember hardly any of it because it was so long ago. No, I think the thing with Mongol Moon and the characters, I put them purposefully as just normal people, right? They had normal jobs. Well, not totally normal. Some were astronauts. But I mean, you got military guys, you got neighbors that are just trying to live their lives. They're just normal people, and they end up having to do extraordinary things, right? And I'm not a fan, at least not anymore, because it's out there so much of Clancy. I think did it right with Jack Ryan, because he wasn't the alpha male type guy, but then you get the Brad Thors and Jack Cars and all those guys, and it's the one Navy SEAL that goes and does all the things, saves the world all the time. I think that's music.
Yeah, we're gonna ignore the music for now. This is the moderator's prerogative. So
gotcha. So I think the asymmetric risk, which I know about, but I don't specialize in, with Mongol Moon, when the bad thing does happen, they need to start moving out pretty smartly or figuring out how they're going to survive right where they are and do all the things that they need to do right then and there, right? And they have to make choices based on this or that. They have to make some really drastic, like life-changing choices, like immediately. And it's all based on risk and risk decision and being able to recognize it, right? Otherwise, they're dead. So I don't know many people that have those type of decisions to make all day long, except for like cops and firemen and bad guys, because bad guys make those decisions all the time, and sometimes they turn out wrong and they walk into the wrong house. So that's kind of an asymmetric. I can't even say the word anymore. Risk. So yeah, I didn't think at all about asymmetric risk when I wrote the book, or as I've been writing the sequel, but it's in there, obviously. There's definitely one that Joe likes to highlight a lot about flashlights, right? The guy in the book, and I thought it would be ironical to have the prepper that's prepared for everything. And I'm not giving it away. The book's been out 3 years. If you haven't read it, I don't care. I'm going to tell the story. He's prepared for everything, and the lights go out, right? And he's got a little dog. It's my little dog. I wrote my dog into the story, and I've tripped over my little dog on the stairs going up. This guy, because the lights go out and he doesn't have a flashlight in every room, trips on the dog and doesn't want to squish the dog. So he pulls his foot up and falls down the stairs, breaks his neck. So the prepper has died at the beginning, right? Mm-hmm. Because he didn't have flashlights, right? So there are risks all around us. I don't know whether they're asymmetrical or not, but you have to make these calls all the time. And there's plenty of them in Mongol Moon. And I'm sure there's plenty of them in Ron's books. And Joe talks all about them in his books. So that's where it is. I'll think about that tomorrow morning when I'm up at 5 writing the last couple of chapters of the sequel, and it is the last couple of chapters.
That's a lie.
No, it's not. It's not a lie. It's not a lie. I do it every morning. I will think about it.
Gospel.
Are these words that I'm writing this morning? And I'll recall Stan's fuzzy face as he asked me about asymmetric risk in Mongol Moon. Are these words that I'm writing about asymmetrical risk? It's not necessarily what an author of thriller apocalyptic fiction wants to think about, but it's in there. It's obviously.
Well, I don't know, because I'm going to turn it over to the next guy who seems to have made a writing career looking for the leverage points of asymmetrical risk in the Warlock's activities to spend very little but fuck up very much.
Absolutely.
Mike?
That's a good way to put it. Fuck everything up as much as I can, but not spend a lot of money in the process.
Yeah.
I mean, I hadn't thought in those terms because, my training has been unconventional warfare, but there's a great similarity, I think, in the definition of unconventional response versus an asymmetrical response. There's some similarities.
It's all about the asymmetric leverage in the concept of an unconventional risk.
So I'll speak to this one only because I know Stan read Brine of War, and it's just one tiny facet of all the things comprehensively that China is doing to dominate economically, and so I focus on lithium, one of the components, one of the minerals needed to make electric vehicles, batteries. So EVs require storage of power to do their thing. And so if you look at lithium production across the globe, it is dominated by China over 85%. So that is the one thing I want to fuck up in a big way. And I do some little stunts in the book. So I salvaged the Moskva, which was what is it, Joe? A battleship, some kind of
It's a heavy
Russian
cruiser.
Guided missile cruiser, yeah.
Yeah. So I salvaged the torpedo tubes, covertly, I guess, from that ship. And the general idea is to use those to place blame on the Russians on a target, targeting something to do with lithium against the Chinese. So that's an unconventional kind of warfare idea, I guess. But also it very well fits into this definition of asymmetric risk, asymmetric response. So that's probably the one I could come off at the top of my head, Stan.
Yeah. The Diaticus got an interesting comment in the chat, because sometimes asymmetric risk does get linked with chaos theory in terms of a small disturbance in one area having a multiplying effect across a system. And that's going to take us to our next slide, if you would, please, Watcher. And so this is, whether they know it or not, I think this is what's borne out in the writing that these guys have done around some of their asymmetrical risks. And that is, the more complex a system is, going back to chaos theory and asymmetrical risk, the easier it is to find some leverage point in which to disrupt complex systems. And here we've got sort of the Mount Rushmore of failures to recognize asymmetric risk, or to deal with it, or to recognize, or maybe recognize it but choose to ignore it, where normalcy bias kicks in. And it's across a wide range of things. I mean, so we've got the Vietnam War, which I'm going to ask a couple of our guys to speak to. We've got 9/11, which I'll ask our guys to sort of give their thoughts to. We've got the Iranian hostage crisis. We've got the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut in '83. We've got the great financial crisis in 2008 of a different kind. We've got Benghazi, and we've got the most recent aspect of asymmetrical risk, where we got our ass kicked by a bunch of sheep herders with AK-47s. But we gave them $80 billion worth of weapons at the end. So the point is that these are all examples of other people leveraging us by embracing asymmetrical risk and doing a whole lot with a little, in the context of adverse outcomes for the United States. And even in the financial world, where people did things that they knew were gonna crash at some particular point, but the getting was good, and so they were able to do that until it all sort of came down. But I don't know. Ron, you want to talk about asymmetrical risk in Vietnam, or the Iranian hostage crisis, or any of the other obstacles, or the examples we have here?
Well, I can talk about the Iranian hostage crisis, because that was, I was actually, on active duty then. Vietnam happened. That's all. I only know about Vietnam from what I see on the History Channel. But the Iranian hostage crisis was a tremendous surprise to all of us. Well, some of us, most of us. Some of us were not surprised. The radical students, and I air quotes around the word students, the Khomeini coming in. I mean, President Carter was warned that if he let the Shah come into United States for his cancer treatment, it would cause an uproar, and Khomeini would leverage that. He chose to ignore that, and can't doubt the decision now. And the students use that to leverage the rest of the Iranian populace, which was already in a high state of upsetness. And next thing you know, the State Department's embassy there gets taken over by quote unquote hostages. And there obviously wasn't a large enough Marine Guard force. It was a very large compound, um, and they were ordered not to shoot. And the Iranians used our um, our fear of causing undue harm to other human beings to their advantage. Um, and even though we had locked ourselves, or not we, I wasn't there, but the Americans had locked themselves in the crypto vault. They'd found other Americans, and they were using them to, if you don't open this up, we're going to kill these Americans out here. So they get open, and everybody becomes a hostage. Um, and it was shocking. And of course, the first thing we do, we the United States government, is we go to the old playbook. Oh, this is well, we'll talk to the Iranian government, and we'll get this all taken care of, because they had taken over the embassy briefly once before. But the Iranians, they did the international convention norm thing, and they went to get the release the return the embassy to the United States. Um, well, this time they didn't do that, and we ended up in a protracted 400 and some odd days of
444.
hostage. And that's when Ted Koppel and his ears became a national symbol. Every day we had days such and such of the Iranian hostage crisis. Um, it gave rise to then the people that were sitting way on the outside of the arena. We're jumping up and down saying, "Hey, I know how we can work this." And Charlie Beckwith and Dick Meadows and other icons of the early days of special operations, um, were allowed to create the Delta Force. And unfortunately, it fell, to every service has to have a part instead of and that's always been a failure of a lot of our joint doctrine. Um, and also, we had the blue light team in Germany that was also wanted to go. So there was competition between two quote unquote special activity or special operations forces. It was just it was a kaleidoscope of errors. It was and then once the Iranian hostage rescue, failed for multiple reasons, and I think the Holloway report was a tremendous one of the few times the U.S. government actually took the time to self-critique itself honestly. And we saw some positive outgrowth out of that. The creation of JSOC, for better for worse. The creation of SOCOM, for better for worse.
Uh,
Dedicated
hey, Ron,
units. Yes, sir.
I could a correction, I guess.
Okay.
Ironically, even though we had in '79 the hostage rescue attempt, JSOC really was not created until after Grenada. That
okay.
the actual JSOC itself was created after the Grenadian
Right.
effort.
Urgent Fury. But
So,
yeah, but
so
the
what do
Holloway
we,
report was an impetus for a lot of those changes, and it
Yep.
takes time because the United States, the U.S. government does not move quickly on just about everything. It moves slow and ponderously.
so I think I can take out of that, and I'll ask Washer to go back to the slide that had the various unfavorable outcomes there. I think what we can see out of that, though, is that in each of these instances, the people responsible for assessing these risks didn't see what they needed to see, or they were bombarded with information. Not only did they not have perfect information, they may have had too much information, or they were paying attention to the information that really wasn't relevant. And in the context of the Iranian hostage crisis, I'll give you a counterpoint here that I lived. Because 1978, I was a junior in college in Fulton, Missouri, at Westminster College, where 20 some odd years before that, or 1946, Winston Churchill had come to give the Iron Curtain speech, and that endowed a lecture called the Green Lecture. And I got picked my junior year. I was the student who was responsible for selecting the Green Lecture for 1978. Okay, and I almost got kicked out of school because I invited the Iranian ambassador to the United States to come give the follow-on to the Churchill lecture in 1978, and he was also the Shah's brother-in-law and was running around with Hollywood starlets and everything else. But I wanted to hear what he had to say because I thought, given everything that was going on in Iran, I thought that would be an interesting thing. And he came and gave a speech. But the thing that was really telling to me about that was that here in this little town, smack in the middle of Missouri, okay, small 800 student college, men's college, still at that time. We had 5,000 Iranian protesters bust into Fulton, Missouri, and and TV crews. These were students, Iranian students around the country, showed up, all of whom had paper plates with eye holes cut out because if they were on the news and their image got back to Iran and to the Savak, then their families would be harmed. And I looked at that and I thought, guys, there's something going on here that isn't in the regular, nightly news. If 5,000 Iranian kids from all of the students got on buses and came to Fulton, Missouri to protest this guy, this is deeper enmity than what we think it may be. And so not seeing the things that you need to see is an important part of your inability to avoid asymmetrical risk in that situation. And I think that's just one example of the ability to not necessarily see what you need to see, or the willingness or the ability to make a good decision.
Well, I'd like to just kind of wrap it up. And by the way, folks, if you haven't hit the like button, please do, because otherwise I'll get fired.
No,
I'd have to work harder to do that. But as an intelligence officer, one of our biggest challenges is we gather the information, and sometimes it's unpleasant information that the king or the duke may not want to hear, the general may not want to hear, the chief of station, the ambassador, the president may not want to hear. Don't tell them what they want to know. Tell them what they need to know, and that's always an important distinction. In Afghanistan, after the initial couple years when we were, victorious and we stood astride, the Hindu Kush and everything like that. After that, it rapidly disintegrated to what happened a year and a half ago. And in those last few tours, you start telling the senior officers in ISAF and the embassy and the station that the ANA, they're not motivated. I mean, these battalion and brigade commanders, oh yeah, they got a lot of people on the rolls, but they really don't have that many people. There's a lot of ghost soldiers out there, and they're really not motivated, and they don't want to do anything. When we would go out on operations with Afghans, they would basically like, oh, I found a comfortable, safe spot here. We'll let you Americans do the fighting for us. And I'm basically yelling at these people like, it's not my country.
Yeah.
But but you go back to Kabul or to Bagram or to Kandahar, to the headquarters. They didn't want to hear that. They were so invested in victory, but nobody could ever define what victory was. Anyways, enough.
Jim, give me a couple of minutes, and I know I'm over the clock, but I'm just going to wing it here because I'm watching the master clock, and we're okay on time, I think. But Jim, give me a couple of minutes. Again, we're talking about the complexity of systems and how that can yield opportunities to extract risk and to impose adverse outcomes on your adversary here. Give me a couple of minutes you spend a lot of time on systems, the systems security, systems analysis, systems, risk in systems. Give me a sense of where we are globally in terms of the proliferation of systems that are at risk for asymmetric outcomes.
Well, I'm going to say all of them because
Okay, moving right along.
I've got some interesting points on this, but I just want to point out that Ron made a point about the concept of what people want to hear. And I just think that the concept of need to know has almost become catastrophic, and it's exclusive, not inclusive. And I think this concept of information control has gotten way out of hand. So people don't share information defensively and they use the system of compartmentalization to keep people from knowing things. And I think that's become almost damaging in a lot of our organizations, whether they're government or commercial. But I learned a lot this year about systems, and I learned a lot about risk from people much smarter than me, including you gentlemen. What I learned is that there's a lot of knowledge about system risk. People understand how a single system operates. We're now moving into a world where systems of systems is the challenge. So you're not looking at one thing, but you're looking at a multitude of systems that operate together, and they share risk. And sometimes they don't share risk, but the behavior is always unique. And when you add one more piece of complexity, it begins to crumble. So I was shocked how the math around AI and machine learning has really been poorly defined. And there's been some interesting overpromising on the concept of AI. And there's some really interesting problems with machine learning and the understanding. And this is quoting a much brighter person than me on systems and software and mathematics. You have the care and feeding of artificial intelligence is really important. And a lot of organizations have begun relying on artificial intelligence to solve their risk problems. They're really getting ahead of the capacity of the technology and the knowledge base that goes into it, because most of that relies on machine learning, and it doesn't end. And when they started using the concept of care and feeding of artificial intelligence, I immediately began to feel that we really aren't prepared for that dynamic transfer of risk. The things that are really biting me in the rear end on a commercial world are just we make very large policy decisions like the climate and energy policy in the United States, and we don't see the knock-on effect. And so the things I pointed out to you this week, Stan, primary steel, building specialized steel for various components of infrastructure. I don't think the U.S. really understands how vulnerable we are. Agriculture, as we've seen with petrochemicals, travel transport, as we've seen with the rails, confluence of, again, the system of labor and the system of energy and the availability of machines and capacity, they converge. And you have to watch that these little things that occur in concurrence or in a series don't build up and cause failure.
So watch your 1 second, Jim. Can you give me the next slide? Because I think this segues very well. Okay. And so, Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to sort of tee you up to go a little further with this, with the following comment, and that is, so why aren't we better at asymmetric risk, and what's our capacity to really respond constructively? It hasn't been proven to be very great in situations, even with single systems like the Iran hostage crisis or the Afghan war, or the Vietnam War, or what have you. We these one-off situations, we don't respond very well to the complexity of those situations. And I think where we are now in terms of the aggregation of risks to systems and the interaction of those systems is, I think we're setting up for a cascade of asymmetric risks when systems take down other systems, not unlike dominoes. Okay. And we live some of that in the pandemic in terms of supply chain. We live some of that certainly in the context of biological hazards with respect to COVID-19 and long COVID and short COVID and blood clots 6 meters long pulled out of people's legs in response to the vaccine and all the rest of this sort of stuff. And I think our challenge now is, how do we respond to multiple simultaneous asymmetric risks that may create a cascade that we're all sort of scratching our heads about. Yeah.
Hey, Stan, before you let Jim loose, I just want to make one comment on that slide. It says, why aren't we? And, one reason why we aren't could just be we take a policy stance on X. And the example I'm going to use is, we, the United States, take a policy stance on climate change, which leads to, we must pursue, electric vehicles, yada, yada, yada. and it's right there. It's right in front of your face. 85 to 90% of the lithium that's used in these batteries is directly coming from China. So whatever you're doing with your global climate change policy, Mr. Biden, I can tell you who's profiting. So I mean, just to answer that question on the slide, part of that is policy uh, prejudices the consumer, as Ron was saying. You may not like what I'm about to tell you, Mr. President POTUS, in your brief, but you need to know the following, which is fine if he's listening. If he doesn't have a predetermined bias to not listen to what you're saying, that's part of the reason why.
Yeah, it's a good point. And the China lithium model comes down to just a palette for understanding that you have to take risk. We have plenty of lithium here. We have lithium in friendly countries, and we're just unwilling to take the policy risk. And that, I've got that written down a couple times in my notes here, just out of this conversation, is policy risk in Washington has merged with individual branding risk for the policymakers. Because the policymakers, these young guys, they're really bright. They come out of Yale and Princeton and Yale, and they end up believing in the timing sequence of the outcomes their policy will give them based on their planning, right? Personal, individual planning, not national interest, right? So this is where Ron is very clear. There's a problem with identifying risk early enough and being able to present it to leadership, because sometimes it's different than what you told them the day before. Things change. It's dynamic. As Stan said, multiple systems. I'm going to go back to David and Goliath for just like 1 nanosecond here and say, in that story, God was on David's side, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you put that into the context of the modern society, you have to look at these young people and say, hey, look, trust your instincts. And when you look at a 35-year-old PhD or a 40-year-old PhD, an investment banker who's really never gone out into the world and had multiple employees, they've moved a lot of money, they've had a lot of influence. You say to them, hey, look, this is in the national interest. They'll look at you and go, but I told the guy, this is the deal, right? They're formative and rigid, and the liability is that the deal doesn't occur. And I think that manifests our Iran policy. I think it manifests our China policy. I think we've had deal teams, and the deal teams keep coming and going out of our government. And so you see the same deal, it pops up. And all of a sudden they rediscovered, geez, maybe we can become closer and not decouple. It's the same language, guys. Same people. Listen to what they've been saying for a decade. And I see it pop up over and over again. So God was on David's side. I speak to these younger people and say, just trust your instincts, right? And if you want to be formative, be honest to leadership, because that's your job. As Ron said, as an intelligence officer, that was his job. They don't want to hear it, but sometimes you got to say it. And if they walk you out the door, that's okay, right? That's how you maintain integrity in that arena. On the Harry slide, I see the photo of Harry, and I just shake my head and wonder, there's an Austro-Hungarian thread in that family for sure. And, Hungarian redheads, just run, leave the bar. That's just a wise an observation. And watch the small things. And again, just trust your instincts on decision-making and risk, because that's why the brain is so complicated. And that's why AI and ML haven't caught up with us yet. They may at some point, but we're going to have to build it.
Well, see, what I worry about in the context of these interlocking systems of risk is let's say that you punch through in terms of delivering the message to the decision maker about this is what you have to pay attention to. But in our current political environment, let's say that runs counter to the prevailing narrative, which must be true. for their political activities to have merit themselves. Okay, so pick it: climate change, electrification, gender identity, all sorts of things which must be true in a current administration. And oftentimes the solutions to these risks, energy is one of them, food is another, requires them to embrace something that runs counter to, or maybe is diametrically opposed to, the narrative that got them to where they are. And that is, we were told to follow the science in the COVID-19 pandemic. And there's pretty good evidence that ivermectin and other things had some benefit to it. But it was just shut down. Some of it was shut down because it was Trump's idea. Okay, that's all about the science there, right? So we exacerbate asymmetrical risk when, even if we listen to what the real thing is that we need to be focused on, it falls outside the current catechism, political or otherwise, and it's heresy. The answer is heresy, and so we just let the system function, and the risk and the outcome just metastasizes. So I don't feel good. I don't feel good about our ability to deal with this risk, because a lot of the answers to these questions, A, are based on common sense, and we haven't demonstrated much capacity to utilize that, and B, may just run counter to whatever the current narrative is for the party in power, and that can be Republicans as well as Democrats at any given time. Yeah, Joe, you're
I have a very quick asymmetric risk example that wasn't observed and things happened. Since Jim brought it up, Princess Diana had a bodyguard named Officer Manaki of the Royal Protection Unit, the Dignitary Protection Unit.
Yep.
He had red hair at about the right time. I'm just going to point that out. Asymmetric risk that was not realized. And we now have Prince William.
They're Harry.
Yeah, Harry. Sorry, my bad.
They all look alike. Yeah. All right.
Thanks, Joe.
So we don't deal with asymmetric risk terribly well as a government, or as a republic, or as maybe in terms of a society, because we're too busy focused on other things. But every once in a while we kind of get it right. Okay, so after the Great War on Terrorism and the things that led up to it, we formed some units. We got around to it. We formed some units, the Asymmetric Warfare Group, the Rapid Equipment Group, and I'll let people who know more about this speak to this than I know. And yet, just as those guys were kind of hitting their stride, and just as we'd sort of honed that skill set, what did we do, fellas? Anybody?
We got rid of them.
We got rid of them. We disbanded them. I'm going to let those of you who are closest to this sort of talk about what the rationale was for disbanding these people, these units that actually were pretty well regarded. Now, keep in mind that at the same time we were building literal combat ships in the tens of hundreds, all sorts of other things that made absolutely no sense. But these groups, who had been proven to be effective, we decided we were going to disband them and disperse them into traditional Army, Navy, Marine units. Why would we do that? Whose ox got gored in that instance?
Well, the G1 was over. We went home. We didn't need asymmetric. We're pivoting to peer-on-peer conflict. We don't need asymmetric. This is going to be World War II all over again,
And because that's what
battles.
The think tanks told us, that we were going to pivot then to peer-on-peer land battles and other aspects. And yet,
Right.
What do we have? We talk about this occasionally on the Future Conflict show, and Joe beat it into our heads as catechism itself early in that process, and he's proven to be right. Okay, and that is, we don't have a single world war going on. We've got a collection of local civil wars that are, Peru kicked off today, right? Brazil, by, I think Costa's in the chat. By the 12th, the Brazilian population, or Bolsonaro, or the army, or all the above, is going to have to make a decision about, are they going to certify this election or not? Because I think that's the day that they have to do it. and who knows what's going to come out of that situation. So
Right.
we don't the concept of the Axis is going to declare war on the or back to the Archduke Ferdinand thing where there we've got a situation where this block of allies declares war on that block of allies.
Yeah. Well, the
I know.
asymmetric warfare group was
Yeah, there you go.
was successful at the tactical level. The
But
embeds they had.
failed at the political level. Is that what you're
Well,
going to tell me?
they failed it at the doctrinal level. They really couldn't come up with a a strong reason to continue to exist. Um, they would write stuff and well, that's what we have SF for. Oh, that's what we have the infantry school for. Or we have command general staff college for. You know, but tactically, the guys that would embed with the units out in the at the FOBs and the COBs and the patrol bases were extraordinary, and they kept young soldiers and alive, and they took young lieutenants and young captains under their wing and taught them the ways of the force, if you will, of how to fight a guerrilla conflict and how to come out on top at that level. The the
Hey,
problem was is
Ron,
that they never really. Sure.
I know you spent time with them. My recollection of what their function was to advise and assist, which is a term you'll hear as special forces guys say, but advise and assist U.S. forces, U.S.
Right.
units. I mean, that's
Right.
the distinction. I just
That's
want
what they did.
people to understand.
They went in with U.S. troops, in at pick a FOB, pick a COB, and and unfortunately they couldn't go to all of them. They would pick the ones where they had made the, they sort of did the dartboard selection and said, hey, we think this is where we can go and have a positive impact, and take the fight to the enemy. But again, from an overarching army point of view, they really never established any strong roots type thing. Now there is this new irregular warfare center that's being very what's the word you used today, Stan? Pedantic.
Pedantic, yes.
They're writing very important doctrinal pieces of sure to put you to sleep within 3 pages. But yeah, so it's fun
So
times.
we've turned it into a think tank.
Pretty much.
I guess what the point I wanted to make was they may have been cut because the cutters did not understand the distinction between, say, special
Mhm.
forces and asymmetric warfare group. And I think another thing that they did excel in was, let's say you're the infantry school and here's your doctrine for a company movement to contact, whatever.
Mhm.
And it says what? And then over there, the artillery school has doctrine. Well, this is how to support a movement to contact, but it's their separate thing. This is artillery stuff we're talking about, and it might be in a broader integration with the maneuver elements. But there really was no glue doctrine holding those two pieces together, and that's what the AWG guys would do. They take these two disparate pieces of doctrine, make that glue, not in the schoolhouse in a written format, but they would do all that analysis and they would bring it to the battlefield and they say, okay, company commander, when you're doing your thing, this is how well, I think that's the value that they brought, or at least one. But they didn't kind of dot all the I's and cross all the T's.
Right, and it also threatened the traditional way of the infantry, and a lot of the more senior the battalion and brigade commanders couldn't comprehend. So yeah.
Okay. Washer, let's move on. Let's take up our next little segment on this. Well, yes. So Joe, I'm going to let you start us off on this, and I'm going to at the outset, I'm going to pay tribute to Matt at NC Scout for this article that he wrote on American Partisan that we've talked about to a degree elsewhere, but I want to get into this in terms of again the asymmetrical nature of the outcome relative to a handful of guys with weapons shooting up a substation. But can you give us a little bit of insight as to what's going on with this now and where we are?
Yeah. So essentially, first of all, yeah, Matt has provided a lot of great information. He wrote a great article over there, American Partisan. Check it out. He couldn't be with us tonight because he's teaching a class. But so essentially, this is a known risk that we should have been doing something about for years and just haven't. In 2013, there was an incident known as the Metcalf incident where a group of subjects, still unknown, still unidentified, fired over 100 rounds into a power substation in Metcalf, California, took out power to a small local area, never caught, and the power came back on almost instantly. But it's what we in the counterterrorism and security field called a proof of concept attack. They wanted to see if they could do it, engage police responses, and after that, nothing's really been done to secure these. So essentially what happened in Moore County was there was a spate of attacks. I know the media keeps telling you there were two. There were two that were actually successful. There were actually 12 different substations that came under fire. Two of them suffered catastrophic failures. There were also a couple of service lines between these that were cut. So basically someone who knew about the Metcalf report, including perhaps some of the more classified aspects of it, knew what they were doing when they launched this attack. So the attack happened. Power went out almost immediately to an entire county. About 40,000 people are impacted. They keep telling us that the power will be back on tomorrow. I'm not certain that.
Well, I think we froze Joe. Well, if he comes back, we'll let him pick up from there. But Ron, I know you can. Yeah, you're back. Go ahead.
Am I back now?
Yo, your voice is back, but you seem to be frozen. But go ahead, you can talk. Go.
Guys, am I back on the show?
You're all yes. I'm not.
This is weird because you guys were all frozen. Okay, that's kind of weird, guys. I'm not gonna lie. That's a little bit weird.
No rounds of 7.62 by 39 were involved.
Yeah. So
Joe
actually,
continues.
7.62 by 39 rounds were used in the attack to punch the holes in there, same as in the Metcalf incident. So in other words, there's a lot of interesting things going on with this. We are also finding out now that about 2 weeks ago, there were attacks at Camp Lejeune and Cherry Point Naval Air, which is where the Marine Corps air assets are. So this is right next to Fort Bragg. It's entirely possible that was the target.
Ron, your son's in the region, right?
Weird.
He actually lives in the county, and he firsthand reports. Obviously, the power went out, and and it was weird, because they have hurricanes and tornadoes and storms, so they lose power, but it went out, and the first thing that my son realized something was wrong was when the sheriff called him and said, "Hey, are we at war? Is there something going on? Is the 82nd on alert? Are you guys deploying? What's going on?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" He says, and he describes at least the two attacks on the substations, and he says, "Yeah, and the whole county's out." And and he goes, "Oh," and so anyway, so the sheriff obviously is very busy, so he goes away. And the reason my son knows the sheriff is because they shoot at the range, a civilian range, a lot. The well, the next thing, as it gets dark and it gets deathly quiet, very dark. And if you've ever been in a place with zero electricity, and we're not talking in the woods, I'm talking in quote unquote civilization, it's an eerie, spooky, scary feeling. Um, the next thing my son reports was you could hear gunfire, multiple gunfires in the distance. And the next day when he's stopping for fuel outside the county where they still have power, he hears about the various different armed robbery attempts of looters attempting to take advantage of stuff, and store owners ventilating these people. Um, so it's scary. I find it interesting that the substations affected just the county, because electrical grids are so interconnected and widely dispersed, they don't really follow the county. But he reports that also there's some bleed over into some of the other counties around.
Yeah, you can see that on the map there that's on the slide.
Right.
It
But
falls-
he
yeah.
says they're supposedly bringing in I've never heard of this before, but I guess it exists, a portable substation, and they'll travel around the county to, like, okay, you can get 3 hours of power now. It's like a rolling whiteout, or a white up, or whatever you want to go,
Yeah.
power up.
Those are on the back of like a trailer, and they haul them around. Yeah.
Right. But
It's a
you know,
sad
he-
commentary on the United States, I think.
Right.
in some
But
ways.
Joe, you made a comment, and I think you sort of answered your own comment. Is you talked about the Metcalf incident and that nothing has been done, but you described how many substations were just in that small county alone, and and now put that on a national scale, and uh, it's a near, if you defend everything, you defend nothing. So I just, how do we do that?
Well,
And
I
how do
will
we
tell
how do
you
we
that
protect them?
today there is a scramble to get armed teams to as many substations as you can, and they just had no idea how many there were. So
Right.
it's a scheduling nightmare today.
Yeah, I think our takeaway on this is that asymmetric risk, it's in your hometown, right? I mean, it's something that is, and that armed groups, and I don't know which flavor these guys were or gals were, and if they're Antifa or domestic right wing extremists, or Quds Force guys that came up from Venezuela. Who knows? I don't know the answer to that.
No.
But what it shows you, though, is that, again, the more complex the system, there's a relatively large return on a couple cases of 762 by 39, right?
Mhm.
And it really is highly disruptive to our system, and we're not just prepared to deal with it. There's not enough redundancy or sustainability that's built into the system.
And the OPSEC of this group, whoever, or persons unknown, um, was tremendous, because there was no leak, there was no
No claim, yeah.
nobody running to the police. Hey, there's these XYZ guys and gals, and and they're planning something terrible. Yeah, so it's one of those things where, like, well, how do we defend against that? How do I even know if I'm facing an asymmetric threat to my power substations and things like that?
Right.
It's
Right.
it's hard.
So let's pivot this a little bit, and we're going to wrap this topic up and go on to some other aspects of the show in just a few minutes. If I can get the last slide in this block. So how do you how we took this is a form of preparedness. It's a form of being ready. How do you figure asymmetric risk into your daily life? And how do you use asymmetric risk maybe to get the promotion that you want, right? How do you manipulate your system at work to get the promotion? So, a couple real quick points, and then I'm going to turn this over to the logical conclusion at the end, and that is, what are things I can read or watch that give me insight into creating favorable asymmetric risk in my finances, in my career, in my education, or my fitness or preparedness, and or how can I get better at the principal advantage or the potential advantages of asymmetric risk? In other words, how do you practice those things we talked about? I'm never going to have perfect information. I may have to take my time, but yet I can't be overly patient. I'm going to have to risk a major disruption, but it may not be a great deal of effort that I have to put into it. Again, a couple cases of 762 by 39, and look what those guys got out of it in that instance. Okay, so how can I be smart in terms of moving that boulder with my log and my prop and use the principles of asymmetric risk. What clubs or societies or organizations can I join that allow me to generate favorable outcomes from asymmetric risk for myself, or what relationships do I have that can be cultivated? And really, what you got to do, you got to put time, money, and willpower into this. And we can talk more about this at some point, or I'll encourage you to go look at this yourself. But think about how you do a lot with the least amount of effort by creating personal leverage through the use of asymmetric risk. And I think that's an important point. And that's going to take us to our next promotion. And it would seem to make sense in terms of talking about asymmetric risk and preparedness that we bring in Mr. Dolio to talk about tactical wisdom. So if you can give us that, yeah. You're on mute, Joe.
No, I'm not. No,
Okay.
that was Sibley. That was on mute, not
Okay.
me.
Okay.
I'm not a boomer. Tactical-wisdom.com is a site where you can learn a little more about how to leverage things in your favor, how to get a little more prepared, and how to deal not with the events as they occur, but the second and third order effects, which are those asymmetric risks. And learn a little bit about current events in that. For example, I have an article up right now about how you can handle a power outage in the wintertime and some of the supplies you should have on hand. I've got a book series out there right now with 4 books plus a notebook in there. As Stan points out, I don't know why they're in the order 4, 1, 2, or 1, 3, 2, 3A. I really don't know. But they take you from very basic with the baseline training manual, very basic preparedness skills, all the way up through scouting and patrolling, where you're learning how to gather information around you, conduct ambushes and scouting patrols and things like that. So check them out. My books are available on my website. They're also available at they're also available over at Amazon. I had a patch here I was going to show. I don't know where it went. We also have patches for sale on our website. Check it out. I hope it helps you out a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So we're going to wrap that topic up. We're going to move on to another segment of the show, which we call Over the Horizon. It's meant to sort of wrap up our discussion. So if I can get the slide for Over the Horizon. And what we're going to try to do with this is we've asked some of our participants to give us a couple things that they're keeping an eye on. But what this really is this is sort of the executive summary that goes to the Duke from the Privy Council and says, all right, we talked about what we talked about, but these are things that we're keeping an eye on over the horizon. And you may see these things show up as future topics on shows, or we may do subject matter expert interviews on certain aspects of this. And I'm going to let Ron kick it off with his 2. And we're going to be brief because we're just here to sort of wet the whistle on this. So Ron, why don't you kick us off on ubiquitous technological surveillance, which I couldn't
Right,
fit.
with biometric tagging, locating, and following capabilities.
Right.
I mean, we're seeing the initial of this in places like China, places like the United Kingdom, England, for those uneducated folks in the audience. Yeah, I know, insult the audience, always a smart move, Ron.
That's why you're here, pal.
Yeah.
Laser eyes. Give them laser eyes.
No. They're tired tonight. The the cameras are everywhere. You can't really hide. So we're coming to the point now where technology, either through our cell phones or if I put on my tinfoil hat, through the little nano robots that they're going to inject in us with our next every 2-month COVID booster, if you were that silly to adhere to that stupid stuff. So that's a worry where they're going to be able to track everybody. Now, granted, that's going to take a lot of computing power, and a lot of all those IRS agents are going to be busy doing that. But that's an issue. The other thing is, and we mentioned it earlier in the broadcast here about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is only as good as the programmers that program it, and how they set the learning parameters of the AI. But AI has without proper ethical and physical constraints, can be a real detriment. Yeah, I know I sound like into the Terminator movies and stuff like that, but it really can be a problem. There's enough fictional literature out there that has that's enough to at least get your attention. So and it's within the realm of possibilities. It's not something that's far fetched. It's not H.G. Wells doing Man in the Moon in the 1800s.
Mike, I'm going to ask you to go next, and I think Joe, if you don't mind, and Sibley's not here. After Mike goes, and I'm going to skip my turn, and we're going to let Jim talk about what he wants to talk about in terms of over the horizon. So if you guys will indulge me on that, that's how we'll go. Mike, you want to rip away? Oh,
Maybe
Ursula,
Yeti got him.
Ursula the Snow Bunny got him. Okay.
Well, I didn't have the goddamn thing.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, where was I?
Over the horizon.
Yeah.
Turkish energy hub.
Yeah, well, the way I had it written down in my notes, I'm a little concerned about Turkey being this nexus, hub of oil, gas transport, to circumvent Ukraine, that sort of thing, and that's all fine and good, except for again the alliance of Russia and Turkey, gaining all this leverage, asymmetric leverage against Europe. But the way that relates, if that does happen, the relationship of Turkey and Armenia and Azerbaijan and Iran, that is really going to complicate that region. This nice gas pipeline structure, but there's going to be a lot of competition of who gets a piece of their action in that. So I'm just kind of keeping an eye on that great big blob of area, I guess. And the other one that I had written down is a Dutch company called ASML. And ASML is the guys that make the machines that make integrated circuits and computer chips. And they're really pretty much a monopoly. I think Trump started the general discussion with ASML saying, hey, do not sell your highest technology, EUV technology, to China and give China this great ability to make the highest order chips. And the other thing I'm probably going to kind of start looking into is, what is I think Biden has kind of continued that policy. One of the wise things he has done is to recognize, asymmetric, a single company has that much power in the world. They are the only ones that make this EUV technology. And what is the relationship of ASML, giving stuff to China that they can make it their own chips, and this U.S. Chips and Fabs Act that was passed in October. Those are a couple things I'm kind of keeping an eye on.
Thank you. Jim, what do you got?
Really good points. I think what's going on vis-a-vis international risk is nations are beginning to become nationalist again, and they're doing so without concern about the WTO, without concern about the EU, without concern about US policy. So you're seeing things like Turkey, you're seeing the Chinese just say, enough of that, we're just going to go do what we're wanting to do, because they've harvested what they can harvest. And now they see opportunities in the half of the global economy that really doesn't want to associate with our legalistic view of commerce, right? So the ASML deal, the Chinese are going to build their own ecosystem, right? So they're planning on isolating. They'll become their own island. They'll set their own rules, and they will get the technology they want with or without the United States acquiescence, right? Because there's commercial intent, and we're going into a recession, so people will be incented to try to figure out a commercial solution to sell them something, and you got to remember that it's price irrelevant for them, right? Because it's strategic, and the party, the 90 million members, are going to make those decisions. So you'll see some of the large Chinese semiconductor companies throwing their weight around. There'll be plenty of capital. You'll have the semiconductor activities coming out of places like Tsinghua. They'll double down. They're not going to back up, I think is the way to call it. Turkey's a great observation. The Turks are going to do what the Turks want to do. And it's in their history to have very strong nationalist and national sentiment. They'll do what's in the national interest. They'll make it happen, right? So right now they have an incredible opportunity to harvest everything coming out of Russia and bridge it and put it into legal form. And the inefficiency in that, the price cap plays right into that inefficiency. It doesn't help us. It's just another tariff. I think it's amazing.
We're subsidizing the guys.
Yeah, it's just staggering for me to see Biden do tariffs after they hammered Trump for 4 years on tariffs. This is just a tariff, and they can't enforce it. So the Turkish kind of pivot will just harvest, the value of these oils and grains and whatever else they can get out of the Russian mines. And they'll run it through middlemen in Dubai, China, and India, and it'll re-enter the marketplace more efficiently into Asia because it's commodity, right? So transport cost is relevant, but you'll just see less and less flow between the Western world and the Asia world, non-US, non-European world. So it plays into the ineffectiveness, and the Russians will make plenty of money out of it, and so will all the middlemen. And none of that will kind of embrace the dollar regimen, except down the road when they have to move it into a SWIFT-dominated environment. So when they have to bank it in dollars, if they choose to bank it in dollars, and again, that's an assumption American policymakers make. So I think that's where we're headed.
I'm just going to say what Jim said.
Yeah.
He said it
Exactly.
a lot better than I did.
And I think a third thing is, I think everybody on the planet, every national entity, every country is going to try to harvest money from the FANGs. So Facebook and those guys are going to get harvested by the national because they can. They go to them and say, "Hey, we want $1 billion." And if Facebook, Google want to operate in those countries, they'll pay them $1 billion and they'll move on.
Yeah.
If they don't want to, they don't want to operate in that country, they'll say pound sand.
Yeah, the EU's already got Twitter in its sites.
Oh yeah, they're going to go after all of them. But Twitter, I think Twitter will be at the top of the list. Yeah.
Joe, give us a minute on the Black Hebrew Israelites.
Well, sure. Found the patch, by the way. Here's the patch. Great Christmas gift. Anyway, Black Hebrew Israelites, I think that's what I'm looking at for over the horizon risk. They've been conducting terror attacks all over the country for the last 10 years or so, and increasingly so. And even though the media wants you to forget it, never, ever forget that they launched a Christmas attack last year, a Christmas parade attack. And my other one that I've got an eye on is the same as you, South America. I fear sort of a Marxist EU style bloc coming out of South America.
Yeah, I shudder. I look at what's going on in Latin America, and I shake my head. We've been so asleep at the switch in terms of the Monroe Doctrine, and we've now seeds have been sown down there that is going to yield a bitter harvest, I think, in terms of American policy and things that should be in our backyard. And frankly, it's going to make it more difficult to get what is one of my, Jim's already covered one of my things about the rise of the BRICS, but the southern border, to me, it's not over the horizon. It's in your lap at this particular point. But I just don't know how we become sovereign again as a nation unless we're willing to deal with that issue. And so we'll talk about that at a future date.
I tell you, Smedley Butler is turning over in his grave over our south of the border policy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I would say, Stan, how interconnected that border situation is to the Monroe Doctrine, and we should be making an attempt to dominate this hemisphere and abandon Europe. Kind of the things I was talking about. They're all interconnected. So that border thing is a long pole in the tent.
It is. It's like having pancreas cancer, and we don't want to talk about it. It's really a dangerous and difficult situation. And when Joe Biden is within a hop, skip, and a jump of the border in Arizona, and decides to go get ice cream after trying to pronounce nem and that just tells you that there's no willingness to deal with it constructively at all in the current government. So, all right, I think we're going to wrap this up. If we can go to our last slide there, Watcher, we'll turn this down a little bit. So remember, next week this is a wood engraving of the conspiracy to commit the Parliament bombing, and we're not endorsing that, but we sure do admire the work that they were doing in some way, shape, or form. So I'd like to thank you all for putting up with us for 90 minutes. Although we did hit the clock pretty well, I thought. And we'll be back next week. There'll be more information on topicality. We will have learned from some of the things we didn't do as well as I would like this week, and we'll build on that for next week. And if you want to comment, follow the Privy Council at MT Privy Council on Twitter. Send us a message, send us a tweet, tell us what you want us to talk about. We're pretty ambidextrous. We can cover a lot of different things. We've got some pretty good skill set. And there's a whole room of people behind us that actually can come in and speak to certain things. We may do some things from time to time. We may do one-on-one interviews. They may be recorded interviews with people of interest in areas of topics that we think matter. But we're going to continue to try to focus. And now that we've sort of set the parameters of something that I worry about a lot, which is asymmetrical risk, we're going to take that and we're going to build on that, and we're going to look at problems and issues that we face around the world, both through that lens and other lenses, so that we hope that we can help you make some sense out of it, because nobody in the media is doing stuff like this. The news isn't telling you what's going on. You could usually take the counter position in terms of your evening news, and you'd be closer to the truth than not. So thank you all for watching, and we wish you a good evening and a good rest of the week. We'll see some of you, I think, on Friday on Future Conflict, but we'll see you next Wednesday here, same time, same bat channel, with many of the same faces. We've got some other new folks we're going to work in as well, and I want to thank you for tuning in. That was very kind of you. And Lamb Chop, I hope you got $42 worth, because I don't know what we were supposed to do for that super chat. But again, follow us and send us,
we actually have two more super chats that I just wanted to bang on about real quick.
Yes, I don't want to ignore that.
No, totally fine. So we've got one that came in from Taylor Cook, who is a 3-month subscriber, and I want to thank you for all 3 months of those subscriptions, who says, bring on Chuck Pressburg to talk more about AWG. He would likely have some very interesting things to say about it. And then a $5 Rebel Rant from Rhapsodic, who says, great stream, very interesting topics.
Well, thank you all. That's really good to hear, and we will be better. We will get sharper, and I don't know if we're getting any smarter, but we will get sharper. Thanks again. We'll see you soon.